Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel Stamp Cat Stamps, where I share with you the things that I learned from my stamp collection. Today's video is actually an unplanned video, and by that I mean it wasn't originally on my queue. I have this really long mental to-do list of future videos that I want to make on certain subjects or historical events. And let's just say I'm pretty bad at letting the research stage of my process go on forever. As I find out more and more about the history of a subject, I just keep buying more stamps on the topic and then learning more about those. And then it just becomes this big daunting mental task of how am I going to condense all of this information into a concise yet entertaining episode. And admittedly, that's the entire appeal of philately. You'll learn things you never knew. But other times like now, I just want to do something quick and simple and fun. I decided it's time to get back to basics. I'm just gonna pick a stamp at random, discover what it shows, and share my findings with you. This time I'll be choosing a stamp from my Traveler's album. This was actually a gift from my dad, and a lot of the pages are from his very first stamp collection when he was a boy. These stamps are all duplicates from his main collection, so he gifted me this album. I paged through looking for a stamp that caught my eye, and this is the one that I chose. This stamp is from Uruguay, officially called the República Oriental del Uruguay, or in English, the Eastern Republic of Uruguay. It was issued in 1954 as part of the definitive series on country motifs. The face value is 1 centésimo. The picture shows an illustrated sketch of a man atop a rearing horse. The words La Doma tell us that he is breaking in or taming the wild horse. This is an illustration of a gaucho, which is a character with great cultural significance in Uruguay, Argentina, and southern Brazil. Being a young lady from Canada, I was not too familiar with gaucho culture. From what I read, a gaucho is an extremely skilled horseman and cattle herder. He is brave, valiant, and courageous, but also crafty, a loner, and an outlaw. It's almost like how we view the American cowboy, except with more of a rebellious streak. Kind of like Robin Hood, but the cowboy version. The original gaucho were mestizos, a term for mixed descent of Spanish and native ancestry. The gaucho are greatly celebrated and admired in legend, folklore, and literature. To learn more about how they got their mixed reputation, let's take a look at the history of Uruguay. Uruguay is a country in South America. It's actually the second smallest country in the continent after Suriname and bordered by two giants, Argentina and Brazil. The Uruguay River forms the western border of the country, hence the official name Eastern Republic of Uruguay, meaning the land east of the Uruguay River. The capital is Montevideo, a port city on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean and the Rio de la Plata. The interior of Uruguay is entirely encompassed by a grassland region called La Pampas, vast fertile plains that are perfect for grazing livestock, such as cattle and horses. Cattle and horses were first introduced into this region by Spanish explorers in the early 1600s, which always amazes me to remember that the cattle and horses we see there today were not always there, but instead are descended from animals brought by the Europeans. Obviously, this region was perfect for these animals to thrive, and livestock, especially beef, became and still is one of the major exports of Uruguay. Here we can start to see the development of gaucho culture and how it evolves alongside Uruguay's history. Pre-colonialization, these lands were all inhabited by nomadic tribes. After the introduction of this livestock, men of mixed Spanish and Aboriginal descent emerged, which were expert in both navigating these lands and taming and herding these wild animals. From their tribal origins, they learned a nomadic way of living and survival on these plains. From their Spanish origins, they learned the art of handling livestock. The history of Uruguay as a nation basically begins as a back-and-forth tug-of-war between Portugal and Spain. In the 1500s, both nations created settlements along the coast. In colonial times, the Gaucho were outlaws. The Spanish authorities required tax on their profits from the colonies, but the Gaucho would often ignore this authority. There were so many wild cattle roaming the Pampas region that a skilled horseman could survive completely on his own by catching wild cattle, eating their meat, and selling their hides on the contraband market. This lifestyle sometimes attracted some pretty rough characters, people who couldn't normally find work in the city, even some escaped convicts. Then, in the 1800s, many countries started fighting for independence, especially since Spain and Portugal had been invaded by Napoleon, and were no longer in a good position to exert control over their colonies. The Gaucho fought as soldiers in these wars and were formidable opponents because of their skilled horsemanship and intricate knowledge of the land. Their soldier days continued into the many civil wars that followed after the independence revolutions. I'd like to point out here though that the image of a gaucho as a courageous and honorable soldier has been somewhat romanticized. The truth is, these were really rough characters. Especially in the civil wars, they were not exactly morally motivated, but more kind of like mercenaries, fighting for whichever rich landowner would pay the most. Their fighting tactics have been described as ruthless and extremely violent. So how did the image of the gaucho turn from ruthless outlaw to courageous hero? Well, as more and more immigrants started coming to these cities, intellectuals felt that the old values were being lost. They blamed this modernization on the morally bankrupt immigrants, focused on making a quick profit. By contrast, they viewed the gaucho's rural lifestyle and hard work as the genuine and true spirit of the nation. Also, by living independently and on the rural lands, the gaucho were seen as being completely free. In a society with slavery, strict social class rules, and laws for all the colonists, the freedom of the gaucho was quite enviable. The traditional gaucho wears baggy trousers called bombacha, a woolen poncho that's also a saddle pad and sleeping bag, a knife called a facon, a wide-brim hat, and a belt decorated with silver buckle and coins. After a day of rounding up wild cattle and horses on the Pampas plains, gaucho would typically settle down in front of a fire, drinking mate, barbecuing fresh beef, and singing or playing music into the night. While a controversial character, the gaucho is clearly a symbol of cultural importance to Uruguay. I enjoyed learning about these characters and the role that they played in Uruguay's history. Hopefully you enjoyed learning about this subject as well. Thanks for joining me for another episode. As always, stay safe and stay curious. Bye!